of days later, I had several very expensive screws and plates in my arm, a prescription for some lovely painkillers, a lovely shaved head with small patch where they'd opened the skull to relieve the pressure, and a cast thick enough to play baseball with. I would spend the next couple of days in a drug-filled stupor, staring at the ceiling of my bedroom, listening to either daytime or late-night TV, or dozing off into odd dreams. It was about a week later when I first noticed it. I didn't have a whole lot of feeling back in my hand yet, as the nerves had taken a hell of a beating and were still mostly numb. However, it's kind of hard not to notice when your fingers decide to start twitching on their own. And I'm not talking the odd muscle spasm or cramp we all get from time to time. I'm talking full-blown clenching and unclenching and moving side to side. The strangest part was I couldn't feel it at all. It didn't register in my brain that it was moving. It was like the hand belonged to someone else. This continued for a couple of minutes before subsiding. Over the next couple of days, it seemed to spread through the rest of my fingers, though all but my index and thumb were immobilized by the cast. Still, I could feel them talking against the cast for a couple of moments, some dull pain in my hand, and then the movement would subside. I decided to chalk it up to the interaction of the painkillers I'd been taking and various psychiatric drugs I had been on for years. It didn't seem to be a problem, and honestly, it was kind of cool. Very dissociative and trippy. It was about 10 days after it started that I woke up in the middle of the night to an intense stabbing pain in my forearm. I fumbled for the light stand next to my bed, panicked, and when I flipped it on, it was several seconds before I regained composure, enough to start trying to figure out what had happened. The first thing I noticed was a small trickle of blood from the bottom of the cast. Several other bloody spots had started to form on the cast, all in line down my arm from hand. When I looked back to the bed, I saw several spots of blood about where my arm had been resting, along with something else. It was very small, and I had to pick it up and bring it over to the light to get a better look. When I finally realized what it was, I was so startled. I dropped it, and it hit the nightstand and rolled off the surface and behind the headboard. It was a single bloody screw, similar to the one the doctors had shown me after my surgery to explain what they'd done to set my bones. I was back at the hospital ER the next morning. It turns out a bloody cast will get you pretty high up on the priority chart, and I was seen almost immediately. Doctors examined the bloody spots and listened to my story, but their skeptical looks told me I wasn't getting the benefit of the doubt here. Finally, after some hemming and hawing, they ended up cutting the cast off to examine the arm closer. When they did, it was revealed that I had a long, thin scratch from the base of my wrist down to where the cast ended. That gave them pause, but they said something about not taking proper care and letting something get into the cast. My story about the bloody bone screw was chalked up to a vivid dream, brought on by the painkillers. They did seem a bit startled by the odd bruise in my palm, but in the end they simply reapplied the cast and sent me back home, this time with a bottle of Tylenol. The next week and a half saw the weirdness of the whole situation increase. My hand was twitching almost hourly now, and the free thumb and index finger would sometimes pinch me as if possessed of a mind of their own. That's when I decided to get a second opinion from the Hypochondriac's Handbook, the internet. It didn't take long before I managed to track down my symptoms to a very specific condition, that of alien hand syndrome. The extremely rare condition usually follows some sort of brain trauma and is characterized by a complete disassociation from the activities of the given limb. These activities include various rude gestures, violent acts, or other inappropriate motions. The condition is sometimes thought to be brought about by a suppressed personality taking control of the limb. Needless to say, this scared me shitless, especially when I found that there was no known treatment for the condition. At the same time, more weirdness ensued while I slept. Every other morning or so, I'd awaken to feel something jabbing me in the thigh, and reach down to find another bloody bone screw. However, the trail of blood would now lead back to the open end of the cast, just past my finger, and there was no visible blood beyond a few drops on the cast. I still hadn't regained much feeling in the hand or forearm, and was now starting to seriously wonder about what was going on. A return trip to the hospital didn't help at all, as I was told that I was being unrealistic. Alien hand syndrome, they said, was extremely unlikely with the type of brain injury I'd sustained. They were, however, concerned with the new x-rays of my hand, which showed that the bones were not healing quickly, and they began discussing the possible need for a secondary surgery to reset them. I didn't even bother showing them the bag of bloody screws, now number a dozen, that I'd brought with me. I'm sure they'd have rationalised that away as well, despite the odd bruising on my hand when they replaced the cast yet again. The next couple of weeks are when things started getting downright terrifying. More screws showed up in my bed, along with 2 bloody metal plates pushed out the bottom of the cast, always while I was sleeping, until I was pretty sure that every piece of metal that had been put into my arm had been accounted for, and that's when spasms started to get really bad. There wasn't any pain, as I'd lost the feeling in my arm, but it was still noticeable. It seemed like the arm would pulse along its entire length, and sometimes could hear faint organic squishing noises coming from inside the cast. This coincided with the hand itself really starting to act up. It seemed to have gained control of my arm up to the elbow, and it would now raise itself up and knock things off my desk, jam itself against the door to stop me from opening it, or even scratch gouges in my thigh. I eventually resorted to using homemade splint of duct tape and lengths of pipe to immobilise the arm. I'd cover the hand in several layers of socks to keep the exposed fingers from being able to find and bite flesh between its nails. Oh, I'd forgotten about the nails. The nails on the exposed hand, they always seemed to be long. I'd tried trimming them for a while, but they'd always grow back the next morning. When the fingers started to seriously avoid the clippers, I just gave up. That had been the initial logic behind the socks, but it was also what some people may refer to Gaia logic, out of sight, out of mind, comes close to the logic. But there was also an element of blind hope that it would miraculously solve itself. I couldn't maintain a normal sleep schedule anymore, thanks to the odd noises and spasms coming from my arm. I would often awaken from passing out somewhere in the house to feel the hand straining against its bonds. What was more worrying was that it seemed to be getting stronger, while the weird noises and movements had gotten worse. I wasn't able to see the doctor anymore. It was partly fear of what they might find, and partly fear of what might happen if that arm somehow managed to get loose when I was driving a car. So I simply waited for the other shoe to drop. That all culminated in what happened last night. Well, this morning technically. I awoke in the middle of the night to an odd series of stimuli, the sound of scratching fingernails and peeling tape, the feeling of my arm being torqued by something. I didn't want to turn on the light, but I did. I'm not sure why. I think I already knew generally what I would see. The sock taped to the end of the cast was still there, except there was now a hole through them. Extending through the hole was a single finger. Well, it had once been a finger. My finger, what it was now, I don't think there is a word for. It looked like a normal finger, with a neatly trimmed nail, a healthy skin colour, unswollen and unblemished, except for some short hairs on each phalanx between the joints, all 24 or so. It was now easily over 1.5 feet long, and was articulated like no hand on earth ever had been. It had bent backwards over the hand, forming a nauseating loop of flesh, and was scratching at the edges of the tape with that neatly trimmed fingernail, trying to peel it loose. It kept at this for maybe 15 seconds as I watched, before it suddenly stopped, and the tip of the finger slowly rose from its efforts at freeing itself and pointed at my eyes. No, that's not right. That may have been what it might have looked like, objectively, but I knew that it wasn't pointing at my eyes. It was looking me in the eyes. This hideous tendril-like appendage was looking me in the eyes. The next few minutes were a blur. I can only recount snippets. The muscles of my forearm straining against the immobilizing bonds. Me stumbling to my feet, screaming in stark naked terror. The feeling of something else wriggling in the socks over my fingers. The sound of fabric beginning to tear. Me lurching across the room, stumbling and falling to the floor. The sight of rapid movement through the growing hole in the sock. My fingers on my remaining arm, feeling something solid and heavy under their grasp. Another frenzied series of movements, and when time slowed down again, I was slumped on the floor, a heavy weight in my left hand, a screaming pain in my right. I looked down to find a heavy-duty mag light I kept by the side of my bed for nighttime emergencies, clutched in hand. Glancing right, I saw what I'd done. My elbow was bent at an odd angle, a series of heavy circular bruises visible where I'd used the butt of the flashlight to shatter it. The sock at the end of my arm was slightly bloody, and I could feel a twitching mass inside. The one finger that had worked its way out of the sock was writhing on the floor, several joints broken. I'd beaten my fingers to a pulp with the flashlight, but they still had life in them. I sat for a moment while I regained my wits. I ended up downing a couple of the remaining strong painkillers I had left, and by the time they'd kicked in, I discovered that the tentacle finger had managed to pull itself back into the sock. Even then, I could still hear the viscous, wet noises coming from inside the cast, and could hear the finger popping as they set the joints I dislodged. They're still at it. I've already had to whack them a couple of times with a hammer I grabbed from my toolbox while I've been dictating this. I also took a couple of swings at the elbow, just to be on the safe side. My arm probably would hurt like hell, but I don't think I can really call it my arm anymore. See, I think I know what happened. The doctors were right and wrong when they told me my type of injury was not correlated with alien hand syndrome. What they hadn't taken into account was that it might not have been the injury that caused the problem, but the treatment. You see, what they do when you have a severe subdural hematoma and time is in short supply is basically cut a hole in your head to let the blood out. This is similar to the ancient practice of trepanation, a process that was often used by primitive medicine to let evil spirits out of the person. However, this technique was only widely used way before any form of modern medicine or science, because we know better now. Well, maybe we do. The thing currently repurposing one of my extremities begs to differ. But, back on topic, since this occurred before our understanding of modern medicine, the patients would often die from a variety of causes before recovering, so there was never any extensive data on the effects of the process. So, for all we know, it may have let the demons out. The problem is that no one ever did tests to make sure this was a one-way street. Maybe when they opened my skull to save my life, they accidentally let something into me, something with malevolent intent that doesn't follow the laws of reality as we know them. And when they operated on my arm afterwards, the metal screws and plates, combined with loose blood, served as an impromptu ritual to bind it to that part of my body for the time being, so it had to work its way loose from there. It tore its way free and started repurposing what flesh it could get at to serve its new purpose. I'm not sure, these are only guesses, but I don't think it matters anymore. It doesn't really matter if it's demons, aliens, or whatever. I just want this to end. I'm filled with a strange sense of calm now. I have a plan, and I'm going to execute it. I know that whatever is in my arm, it has to be stopped. But I also don't want to die. I'm not sure offing myself would even help. I don't think that the thing in my arm really needs me, judging by its behaviour towards the rest of my body. So suicide or amputation are out. But I've hatched a plan. When I started telling this story, it was really just to kill time. When I do this in order to survive, I need to make sure I'm somewhere people will see me and call for help right away. And that's what helped me arrive at the course of action I'm about to undertake. See, The county is doing some long overdue maintenance on the trees along my street. I can already hear them going at it a couple of doors down with chainsaws. Those saws ain't what interests me though. What interests me though is another piece of equipment they brought with them that I can hear running. A large industrial grade wood chipper. If I'm lucky, I'll be able to tear myself free after it gets to my elbow. And if not, well, I won't ever have to remember what I've been through. Banshees cry. I felt the presence of the woman in white before I heard her call. My body suddenly plagued by shudders and a sense of dark foreboding. The fear, the lament and the pain ached through my ragged body, telling me she will be soon with us, to sing to us the song of the damned. Short, shallow breaths escaped my broken lungs as I felt her move closer to the ramshackle hut I call home. Suddenly, she let loose her screeching wail, sending me to the floor in a heap, sobbing and soaked in my own fear-induced urine. I now knew what my role was. My fate was sealed by the call of the banshee, the cry of the woman in white. I shakily brought myself to my feet and slowly made my way to the door. My hand reached out and grasped the rusted metal handle. The door swung open, rusted hinges creaking, and for the first time in my bleak life, I saw the banshee, the summoner of my kind to their demise or fortune. The woman's dress was so white, so pristine, it illuminated the perpetual night of the Black King's land. As my decrepit eyes ran over her, I was taken aback by her unyielding beauty. The white dress hung loose and translucent, showing her womanly curves and taut breasts. If my body wasn't so corrupted and diseased, I would feel a masculine hunger, but all that ran through me was a sense of longing for a touch of humanity again. Her wailing song stopped abruptly as I made my way to her. Her glowing white eyes stared at me as I kneeled before her otherworldly presence. Her disgust was palpable as she took in the sight of my wretched figure, and I counted myself lucky that I have not seen a mirror in thousands of years. I realised I'd been staring and cast my eyes down to the ground to not upset the one piece of beauty left in a world destroyed. But as I did, I felt her touch my broken body. The pains and aches of thousands of years of torment suddenly dissipated, while I felt my bones rebuild themselves and my ruptured organs mend. I heard a soft, melodious voice whisper in my head, "Arise." Hearing her speak to me sent a warmth through my body, a warmth that my people haven't felt in eons. I arose quick to my feet, but kept my eyes down on the ground, still wanting to respect my saviour. "You are the true chosen of the Black King," her beautiful voice whispered through my soul. "So many have failed, but you are the one who will bring us back to the light." My heart leapt with joy. I was the true chosen. All the pain and torture were quickly forgotten, for I was to be the one who lit the darkness aflame and give the Black King back his empire. The glory itself would be enough for me, but I would be rewarded with riches and land, and maybe even my manhood again. I boldly looked into the empty eyes of the Banshee. If I was the chosen knight, why could I not? As I raised my eyes to hers, a smile appeared on her bright red lips that contrasted beautifully to her pale, radiant skin. She leaned close to me, and I felt the heat emanating off her lips as she pressed them against my mouth. It was as if she lit my body ablaze. Another first in ages. I felt passion burn through my body, and any fear I had for my coming trials subsided completely. I knew right then and there I would do anything to feel this every day. No man or beast would stop me from taking back the light. I will do the king's bidding, my lady. My voice crackled and broke over the words, the first of which I have spoken in many sunless days. Her smile seemed to grow brighter as she pointed in a direction behind me. Go, don the armour, find the gate, defeat the taker of light, bring us out of the darkness. With that, the Banshee disappeared back into the void where she resides. The taker of light. Was it someone or something that took the light from our world? How? Why would something exist so cruel as to send millions into inflexible darkness? Whoever or whatever it is, I swear to defeat. I will be the king's chosen knight and bring light and warmth back to my home. If not for me, then for the beauty of the Banshee. Newly determined, and the thoughts of the lady's soft caress to keep me warm, I set forth for my destiny. The path before me was a treacherous cobblestone road that weaved through the burnt forest and ended at the abandoned capital. As I took my first steps, the sense of confidence I had while in the Banshee's presence slightly subsided. The darkness is something I am accustomed to, but the eternal blackness that surrounded my hovel sent chills down my spine and filled my soul with a palpable dread. I took a deep breath, feeling air fill my lungs, almost not noticing the lack of rattle in them, and moved forward at a slow pace. I knew the direction I must go. The pilgrimage that I am embarking on is not one we are told of, but one that runs through our blood. The message is clear. Once a night falls, the Banshee will find the next, until the chosen knight reigns victorious and brings back the light. In all my years as a subject of the king, I've heard the Banshee scream thousands of times, always in groups of two. The first signifies a fellow knight has fallen. How, I do not know. The second is outside the hut of the next knight in line. Over the few weeks before my selection, I could hear the Banshee getting even closer, knowing my time to make the journey was close at hand. I forced myself to focus on the mission and no longer dwell on my unpleasant past. If I knew a man, the chosen knight to lead the king's land back to its glory, my focus relit and my pace quickened. I made my way forward, feeling the pull of the gate as my body kept me in the right direction. I edged closer and closer to the burnt forest, my eyes landing on a bulky black chest The armour each night only had loose rags, befitting of only a peasant, but once they set out on their journey, they were to find the armour of the pilgrimage and wear it into the battle against the king's enemies. I ran to the chest, feeling the excitement burn through my body. The chest itself was magnificent. The wood, charred black to match the rest of our world, was engraved with ancient sigils, signifying it was the property of the king himself. I fumbled with the rusted metal latch and popped open the top, catching my first glimpse of the armour. It was truly a work of art. The armour was darker than the night itself, with a hooded skull embossed over crossing swords on the breastplate. The elbow joints and the knee covers had thin, extremely sharp blades running parallel with the arms and legs of the armour, showing it was not undeadly, like a child on the morning of their birthday. I tore into the chest and started donning the armour. As I tightened the last strap of the leg pieces, my eyes fell on a small latch at the bottom of the chest. I bent over and pulled on it, and the whole bottom gave way to reveal the helm and sword to pair with the rest of the armour. The sword was a true longsword, 4 feet long with a thick razor-sharp blade. The pommel and hilt were of true artistic design, a leather-wrapped handle and pommel decorated by circular black stones. The helm seemed to focus on practicality, designed of black steel, with mail on the bottom to cover my neck. As I felt the armour caress my body, a feeling of power surged through me. I felt invincible and able to defeat any foe. I took off running towards the gate, no longer wary of what lurked in the dark, no longer fearing any enemy of the unknown. After running in heavy armour for what felt like an hour, I sat against a protruding stump, catching my breath and enjoying the feeling of air moving freely through my lungs. I removed my sword, relishing in the sharp hiss of steel scraping against the metal scabbard. With the sword held in my lap, I took the time to fully inspect its excellent craftsmanship. I ran my mailed hand against the blade, watching as it opened a small gash in the metal. This was truly a sharp blade, and the one who wields it should not be trifled with. But my attentiveness to the lethality of the weapon almost rendered me ignorant of the markings on the top of the pommel. I picked up a small stick on the ground and scraped the caked dirt that covered half the letters, and saw what was hidden there. She lies. There is no meaning. All a dream. What could this mean? This couldn't be speaking of the banshee. One so pure could not lie. I shook off the momentary fear and smiled to myself. I looked up and said, "A test, my king? My faith will not so easily be broke." Before I could finish my sentence, 3 figures entered my peripheral. I couldn't quite make them out. They were only shadows on the edge of eternal blackness. "Who goes there?" I bellowed, my confidence waning. "I am a knight of the king. You shall not impede my journey." Silence. Whoever or whatever is out there was either scared by my presence or was biding its time to attack. Either way, I knew it was time for me to start moving again. I moved with intensity, but a bit slower due to my knowledge of not being alone. Something in my gut told me I was almost out of the forest, which meant the abandoned capital was the only thing standing between me and the gate. Before my joy peaked, I heard a rustling in front of me. I squinted my eyes and could make out a slightly human, albeit disfigured shape. I said once before, you swine, I am not one to be bothered with your trivial pursuits again. Silence. But this time the figure stood still, as two more flanked its position, their movements awkward and shambling. Move out of my way, or I will cut you down where you stand. No response. Then faint laughter. Fool, you are one of many, hissed one of the figures in front of me. You will fall burned by the light you don't deserve. It cackled manically after insulting me, and before I could respond, a second voice started speaking. Sister, be fair to the knight. He has forgotten his own sins. Would you like being made a fool of for your inability to retain knowledge of your past transgressions? I could feel the sarcasm seep through the hisses. The first monster retorted, "He he 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 he. You always had a soft spot for these hapless dupes. Dear Frida, let's see if this one deserves to even reach the gate. He 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 he." I'm not sure what this test was, but I removed my sword and readied it for combat. The three figures shambled towards me, quicker this time. As they closed in, I finally got a good look at whom I was facing, and all three were hideous monstrosities. Their faces were horribly malformed, their noses just slits in their face, eyes sewn shut, and their mouths covered in sores. Their approach gave me insight as to why they shambled. The demoness, legs and arms, were bent and broken at odd angles. One of them, her arm was removed and the bone sharpened to a point. My God, how could beings be so cruel to live? Brace yourself, whores. My sword will tear you to shreds. I leapt forward, bringing down the crushing weight of my steel on the nearest beast. A shrill sound escaped her putrid lips when my blade skewered her shoulder, the noise reminiscent of the banshee. I placed my booted foot against her midsection and yanked my sword free, bringing with it a thick black blood that stunk of rot and decay. The monster laid on the ground, writhing in pain as her sisters shrieked with rage and fear. The second advanced on me, this one armed with a sharpened bone. You will pay for that, knight. The bone blade suddenly extended outwards and slashed towards my face. I brought up my weapon and parried the blow, the metal on bone creating a resounding thud. She came back at me again. This time, however, I was fully ready. I sidestepped gracefully, her momentum driving her forward until she tumbled headlong onto the ground. Unkempt Quim, you think your untutored violence is a match for our own able knight? Before I could finish her off, I felt a sharp pain in my side. I looked down to see a rusted stiletto sticking into my armour. I turned and faced the third sister, this one clearly not as talkative. Ha, I laughed in her face. It seems you have misplaced your sewing needle, my lady. As I spoke, I yanked the thin blade from my side, tightly gripped the third sister's shoulder, and shoved the stiletto into her exposed stomach. She looked up at me and smiled. Grabbing my hands, she pulled the blade deeper inside herself, while the hole I made in her belly started expanding. The edges of her massive open wound sprouted teeth, and I felt what I thought was a tongue brush across my knuckles. I reeled backwards and quickly smashed my forehead into her face, feeling her bones crunch under my thick metal helm. Her iron grip on my hands let go immediately as her limp body crumpled to the earth. No more monologues for me. I lifted my sword in the air and brought it down with all my might. The demon's head was removed with an audible pop, and the wave of stink from the she-beast's rotten blood invaded my nose. Nasty shrew, I mumbled under my breath. Killing my sisters will not help you when you face the light, foe champion, the bone-bladed witch said as she got to her feet. You are nothing. Everything your lady in white told you is I wouldn't let her spew her vile heresy any longer. I thrust the blade forward into her neck, covering my sword and newfound armour in a reeking lifeblood. She slunk to her knees as I pulled my steel out and prepared for the finishing blow. Hee hee. Her repulsive laugh was interrupted by a hacking cough. You will always be damned. As the last word rose to her revolting lips, she collapsed in a heap of mangled limbs and murky bodily fluid. It was the first time in a millennia I saw someone and something in mortal combat, and the feeling was riveting. I smiled as I wiped away the blood on my sword, relishing in the pain I inflicted on those disgusting wenches. I walked around the area of our skirmish, stabbing my sword into their carcasses, making sure none of them would seek revenge later in my journey. But alas, they were all dead, defeated by the king's champion. I laughed aloud, relishing in my victory. But it was time to move on. I went back to my quickened pace, knowing full well I may run into danger, and part of me was excited to test myself in battle again. Another hour had passed, another hour spent running in my armour. The black metal went from a gift to a burden in only half a day, the weight slowing me down and bringing on a sense of lethargy. But before I could give in to the pull of a short nap, the trees started thinning and my eyes fell on the outline of a great city, the abandoned capital. Back before the light was taken from the Black King's land, the abandoned capital stood as a mighty citadel, defending the territory from the king's enemies. If only I had the time, I would explore every nook and cranny of the great city, but the mission must be completed if we were ever to restore our home. My examination could wait. I gazed on the outline of the city, trying to piece together where I would need to enter to find the gate. Making my survey, I noticed a large hole in the city's great wall. I surmised this would be the best way for me to enter. I took off down the hill, more cautious than ever, not wanting to be noticed by whoever or whatever now populated the capital. I found the walls gaping wound and pushed through, stopping just a moment to gaze upwards at the massive guard towers and spiralling churches. The city was truly magnificent, and again felt the pull to explore, but my loyalty prevailed, and I took off in the direction of the Grand Porticulus, the gate that will lead my people to freedom. I ran down the narrow streets and weaved through long forgotten merchant stalls, barely able to register the true grandiosity of my city. My heart was still filled with joy though. I would soon be returning here a hero. But my delight quickly soured. I saw two figures ahead of me, clearly waiting for me to arrive. I slowed my pace, drew my sword, and made my way over to the fools who dared stand in my path. When I felt like I was in hearing distance, I yelled out to the hulking figures, "Out of my way, churls. I'm here on king's business." The figures stood still, unmoved by my resolve. "Did you not hear me, cretins? If need be, I will tear you apart." My words were caught in my throat, and I felt my stomach's contents lurch upwards to meet them. The figures I saw were less human than the woman in the forest. The closest one stood a hair under 5 feet tall, its skin drooping from its pudgy face, as if it were a candle left to burn, the excess skin pulled around its legs and feet, obscuring the rest of the body from my view. I stopped dead in my tracks and sputtered, "What in the king's good name are you?" Before I could answer, the second figure shambled forwards, revealing its broken form. This one's only commonality with a human was its bipedal nature. The beast had massive long arms with large spiked claws protruding out where its hands should be. His face was heavily elongated, with the top of his head covered in a jester's crown, covering his eyes. He opened his mouth, exposing row after row of razor-sharp teeth, and spoke in a gritty, metallic voice. "King's business," he mocked. "You hear this embodiment of pride and egotism, Capsi?" The other seemed to shudder in agreement and spat a putrid pus-like substance out of its melted face. "The king's dead, and your beloved Banshee is just a farce. Your quest is meaningless, and the light will never be yours. This is the second time demons have tried to test me. Their lies congruous with others. No, my faith will not be broken by these fraudulent curs. Your lies will not stop me from completing my quest. I shall pass through the gate and save the land." I brandished my sword and leapt forward. The candle beast had no time to register my powerful attack, my blade cutting through him like butter, expelling more of the beast's foul secretion onto the ground. The monster let out a pathetic gurgle and fell to the earth. If my quest is a farce, why then, demon, do you so easily? I can tell you, it is because this is my destiny, and nothing will get in my way. The tall monster stepped forward and smiled, showing his rows of pointy fangs. "Idiot, you think you are the first? You think your pilgrimage means anything? It means nothing. You are nothing." He screamed and sprang at me, bringing down his sharp talons. I rolled out of the way, feeling the air being parted in front of my face, the monster's claws close to killing me where I stood. I moved backwards, wary of my enemy's speed and length, but not frightened. The beast made another move to attack, but this time I was ready. He lunged forward and I met his steel with mine. The loud twang of metal resounded through the empty homes of the great city and sent us both reeling backwards. He came at me again and again, all of his attacks blocked, until he hung back, exhausted from his futile attempts. "Tired, beast?" I mocked. "Do you understand now? I am the king's chosen. I will be the bringer of light." The beast smiled his toothy grin again and spoke. "Prideful knight, you are clueless. When I'm done carving you up, I will feast on your bones." He lunged again, but instead time I rolled forward and thrusted my sword upwards. I felt as the blade pierced his flesh, disemboweling him in one fell swoop. The monster fell to the ground, coughing and sputtering as I moved in for the kill. "Any last words, filth?" I asked triumphantly. The beast turned his head to look at me. The jester's crown slipped and revealed a set of tired, defeated eyes. "I try it every time and nothing changes. You will see. This pilgrimage is... The beast slumped forward, no longer able to speak. It moaned pathetically one last time and died on the spot it lay. All these demons trying in vain to make me break my faith. I almost feel bad for the louts, but being the king's chosen, I don't have time for pity. Within minutes of my last trial, I was moving swiftly towards the city's edge, finally glimpsing the back walls of the abandoned capital. I climbed a short section of broken wall, landing with a thud on the other side. I dusted the dirt from my armour, and I looked up, seeing the majesty of the gate for the first time. Tears welled up in my eyes as I made the final steps towards my fated destination. When I was mere inches from the gate, the feeling of the woman in white's lips grazing mine hit me like a brick. My body shuddered in delight. It was a sign. I have done it. I have completed my pilgrimage. The minute I walked through the gate, the world will have light again. I smiled triumphantly, ripping off my helm and made the step into the gate. Oddly though, the minute my foot went through the portal, all my good feelings dissipated. The pain I felt for thousands of years returned tenfold. I pushed through, thinking this was one last test of faith, but I couldn't be more wrong. As my face passed through the famed gateway, my whole world turned in blinding white. My body felt as if it was encapsulated in flame, every inch of me burning, each nerve ending screaming for death. What did I do wrong? I was the chosen one, I screamed aloud. I still couldn't see, but I was not yet willing to give up. I pulled my shattered body to my feet, still screaming in pain. My eyes adjusted slightly, and I could make out movement in front of me. It was her. It was my lady in white, here to rescue me. As she got closer, I realised again I was dead wrong. Before, she was the true definition of beauty, but here now, in this bright land, She was a hideous and grotesque corpse, draped in the white cloak. She opened her mutilated lips and said, "This was all a trap, payment due for your sins in life." I dropped to my knees as it all came back to me. I've done this thousands of times. The same results repeatedly, my pride never letting me see the truth. I looked up at my former goddess to let the tears roll down my face. I quit fighting and let the light burn the rest of my tattered body. The last sound I heard was the banshee scream, signalling a night has fallen. The house deep in the woods. It was in my 27th year that I first came upon the house. I was hiking alone in the Alder Creek forest. Rumour had it that there was an old abandoned village deep in the woods, a village whose prosperous years ended some 100 years ago when Shiniko became the wool capital of the world, and no one needed the wool from the town of Alder. Same thing happened to Shiniko a few years later when people found wool cheaper elsewhere. But that is not this story. That isn't my story. My story is about the first time I searched for Alder, a place I plan on going to again tomorrow. But before I go, I felt I should write up my experience in case I don't make it back. Like I said, it was in my 27th year that I last ventured into those woods. I'm now 39 and hope that enough time has passed. I was last out there that it will now be safe. I hope. I am in desperate need of what I found out there because my wife has become ill. Only for her would I ever think of venturing in those woods again. Only the love I have for her. I'm scared. Oh, how scared I am. Even to write this down I'm trembling, but I must get this over with as the night is passing so quickly, and soon it shall be time to go. It was a bright, sunshiny day when I entered the woods, and I was feeling quite optimistic about my journey. I was using a map I found in an old book called Ghosts Towns of the Northwest. It mentioned the town of Alder, but I never actually found Alder. I got lost and got way off track, miles and miles away from any known civilization. I worried that I was lost as I had been walking for at least 6 miles past the distance I was supposed to be walking. It was getting near full darkness when I came across something peculiar. All the way out there, deep in the woods, where no man would need to wander, I came across a freshly carved jack-o'-lantern. It was deformed and taller than it was round, much like a human head, but larger. It was oddly shaped and more bulbous on the left than the right, which made its single-toothed smile look like the grotesque, rotten mouth of an elderly man who has suffered a stroke. Inside I could see something shiny. My curiosity got a hold of me, and I bent down to give the pumpkin a closer look. First thing I noticed was the eyes were unlike any eyes I'd ever seen on a pumpkin. Each spot where an eye would be was made of 4 holes, giving the pumpkin the appearance of having 8 eyes. After examining the mouth and then the eyes, I looked upon the nose with greater concentration, not only looking but touching. The nose was normal. Then I noticed some movement behind the nose. Before I could react, I realized what it was, but it was too late. The pumpkin was home to a nest of spiders that quickly ran up my arm. I ripped off my coat and threw it as far as I could, and then started the task of wiping off the remaining spiders from my arm. Then I stopped because I was stunned. I had glanced at the pumpkin and seen that the top of it was rising up and then off. I was in such a state of fear that I just stood there. Wow. What must have been the queen spider came out. The spider had to squeeze out of the pumpkin. It was so big. Imagine a black spider the size of a baseball glove, covered in orange slime from the pumpkin guts. Then the spider turned and looked right at me. I must have run 2 miles before I finally felt safe enough to stop, thinking, God, please don't let that spider find its way to me. I woke up in the middle of the night when I heard a sound, much like a door being slammed. Am I that close to the road? Am I so lost that I'm nearly out of the woods? I put my tent back in my pack and headed towards the noise. Luckily the fog had lifted, for the moment at least. I started to think that maybe it was all in my head, until I saw a light in the distance, an orange light, and then I could smell it, a fire. Oh my God, the woods are on fire. They must be. I'm way too far out in the woods for there to be someone else out here. But of course, there was that horrible pumpkin. Someone had carved that. I walked slowly in the direction of the fire. Step by step I listened until I got to just outside of the clearing and the blaze of fire. The fire drew my attention for a while, and its heat felt good on my now coatless upper body. As I stood there warming up, I noticed the other queer things around. There was a chair made from a log, with the back support made from twigs nailed to the log. Behind the big flames of this bonfire, I could see a house. Well, a house is an overstatement. It was somewhere in between a shack and a house. I walked around the tree line to get a better view of the house. The house was old, extremely old. Architecture one has never seen. The roof was completely flat, and the house had more windows than walls. Windows that had fogged and cracked from age. Some of the cracks in the windows were filled with dirt. The place gave me the creeps, and a feeling of dread swept over me. I was ready to leave the place when I saw more of the jack-o'-lanterns. Afraid of the spiders, they could contain more giant black spiders. God, I may never sleep soundly again after such a sight. Instead of running, I found myself approaching the house, thinking that maybe the occupant could help me find my way out of these woods, or at least provide a shelter for the night where I wouldn't have to worry about giant spiders. Before knocking, I decided to peek through the window. Inside was nicer than I would have imagined. It was filled old-fashioned furnishings, but not as weathered as the outside of the house. An antique collector would be ecstatic to come across such a find. There was a beautiful old couch and chairs, both covered in velvet, with detailed carvings in the wood, and what looked like a solid oak place, like it was made from scraps of skin. I was about to walk to the door when I saw the inhabitant enter the room. The man looked as old as that trunk with skin that looked just as leathery. He had unkempt hair and an even longer beard. The right side of his face was sloped, just like that pumpkin. He walked over and opened the trunk, and inside it was full of gold and silver coins. I stood there, awestruck, until he turned to me and smiled, revealing his 1 tooth and 8 eyes. I had never been so scared in my life, not until a moment later, when his extra 2 arms and 2 legs sprung out of his body, tearing apart his fake skin, revealing him to be a giant, ugly, black spider. I ran Olympic medal winning fast out of those woods. When I finally got out of the woods, I was miles from my car. I never went back for that car. I never went near those woods again. I hitchhiked out of there and spent the next year drinking, trying to get rid of the image. I know bigger men would have gone back for all that gold, but it wasn't worth losing my life, or even just seeing that thing again was enough of a deterrent. But my wife is sick, and the operation is more than I can afford, so this is my only choice. Really, it is no choice. I love her more than myself. Hopefully, I make it back. Hopefully, this is not the last sentence I ever write. 20th of October 1999. The last entry in John L. Price's diary. Finger licking good. My Uncle Greg was the greatest fry cook of all time. I know that's a bold statement, considering there are fantastic chefs all over the world, but when it came to deep frying, my uncle was the best. In Kentucky, deep frying isn't just a cooking method, it's a way of life. We're the state that gave the world the Colonel's secret recipe, after all. We have a global reputation we have to protect. The most popular deep fried dish is easily chicken, but plenty of other meats taste great when coated in breading and burnt to a crisp in boiling hot oil. Fish, poultry, beef, pork, even sweets. Deep fried soda, ice cream, candy bars, even deep fried butter. Do you know what a hush puppy is? It's a clump of fried coating. But there's more to the art of deep fried cuisine than just the oil, marinating your ingredients, seasoning them, and what I would argue is the most important part, the dry rub. My uncle was a master of the dry rub. When he set up a booth at the state fair every year, people would line up for what seemed like miles to get their hands on his dishes. Pickle braised jumbo ribs, double battered butter burgers, chicken fried nacho sausages, mac and cheese chili poppers, and his unforgettable spicy extra crispy chicken. How to take the most absurd flavour combinations you could think of and always find a way to make them taste amazing. Cheese, ranch, onion, bacon, you name the flavour and he mastered it. The man was a hillbilly scientist. He'd spend hours on his outdoor kitchen patio, combining ingredients, testing different seasonings and spices, trying to find the boldest flavour combinations possible. One summer, I helped him prepare dinner, and I couldn't keep up. By the time I was getting my cutting board ready, he already had 6 different entrees prepared. He won awards from every food festival in town, topped every eating contest. He was a local celebrity, more famous and influential than the mayor, but it wasn't enough for him. He had an appetite that only ever grew stronger. He was 500 pounds by the time I entered high school, and he only ever seemed to get fatter. He didn't want to be known as the best fry cook in Kentucky. He wanted to take over the whole world. His extra crispy, extra spicy, extra fattening chicken was his magnum opus, the Citizen Kane of poultry dishes. It was so hot it could melt your head off, but so delicious you'd be just a pair of feet before you put it down. It was salty, savoury, sweet, just the right amount of stringent and sour. It satisfied any flavour profile. It was decadent, the kind of food biblical kings and ancient Egyptian emperors would eat, the kind of food the gods on Mount Olympus would dine on. It was fantastic, and it was always getting better. Uncle Greg was constantly tweaking his dry rub, his marinade, his breading, his aromatics, constantly adding new spices and taking old ones out. He emptied out entire shelves at superstores, butcher shops and Asian markets. Strangers would visit his house in the middle of the night to ask how his newest batch of chicken was coming along, and he'd stand outside late into the night telling them all about it. Then came the day he finally found it, the perfect mix of everything he had made up to this point, the ultimate dry rub, a masterpiece of marinade, and the world's best breading. He went through 16 entire chickens in less than a week. It tasted so good. The smell was so intoxicating. I could smell it from halfway across town. He had done it. He had finally found the perfect flavour. Everything tasted amazing with it. Chicken and turkey were the first meats he tried, and soon he experimented with beef, pork and lamb. He fried just about every fish in the sea and every vegetable in the ground. He fried fruit, he fried candy, he fried bread. He'd even fried chicken skin and eat it like potato chips. Unfortunately, we never got to try his new secret recipe. He stopped coming to family gatherings. Never bother with state fairs again. Never even left his house. He wanted it all to himself. Even his wife didn't know the recipe. She was growing more and more concerned by the day. She was a health nut. Never bothered eating what her husband made. They didn't even use the same kitchen, so at first it all slipped under the radar. However, by the time he had built a shanty wall around his patio to keep the smoke from escaping, she knew something was very wrong. He had drained their savings dry by buying all sorts of fatty meats, and eventually she closed all their accounts and refused to buy him anything new. He started digging through the trash using rotten food from the back of the fridge. It didn't matter to him. The brine and skin would make it all taste amazing to him. The way the rotten ingredients squished and oozed as he chomped down. It was like they had some kind of creamy filling. By the time she left the house, his wife was the last thing on his mind. When I cooked with my Uncle Greg, one thing I always thought was funny was when I would dip the chicken into the batter and roll it around in the breading. My fingers would get coated in the stuff. It made my fingers look like giant uncooked chicken tenders. Apparently, Uncle Greg noticed this too. He'd always lick the batter off his pudgy fingers like a wild animal, but it was never as good as crunching down on the fried stuff. One day, he got a little too curious. He looked at his fingers covered in coating and was salivating uncontrollably. In the blink of an eye, an impulse overcame him, and the rational part of his brain shut right off. He slammed his fingers down into the hot grease and held them there for a good 5 minutes. He made horrific, painful screams in pain, like a dying rabbit, but after the first 2 minutes, the nerve endings in his hand died, and he felt nothing. When he pulled his hand out, his fingers were a shining golden brown, and the lower parts of his hand, all the way down to his wrist, had turned grey, with all the veins protruding out. Black as night, he pulled his hand to his face and took a big bite into his thumb, hard enough to snap the bone in half. He chomped down on what remained of it, the breading crunching and crisping loudly in his jaws. He chewed on the rest of his fingers, from the index all the way down to the pinky. He wasn't finished yet. He stuck the rest of his hand into his buttermilk marinade, rolled it around in the breading, and repeated the process all over. This time, chomping down on his palm while coating it in nacho cheese, onion ranch, you know, to be healthy. He deep fried his severed wrist and keep frying his arm past the elbow, all the way down to his shoulder blade. Legend has it, he didn't bleed a single drop. I don't know how that would be possible. Maybe the oil cauterized the wounds. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but neither does eating your entire arm with a side of Doritos and some blue cheese dipping sauce. He repeated the whole process with his other arm, then his right leg, and then the left. When paramedics finally found him, his entire face was golden brown. Apparently, he stuck his whole face in the pot, fried it to a crisp, and then used the other to scrape it off so he could eat it. Then, when his face was nothing but gooey red mush, he jammed it back in there and fried it again, drowning in the boiling grease before he could further mutilate himself. I found his secret recipe when the rest of the family were rummaging through the house, dividing his belongings among themselves. I ripped it up and threw it in the garbage. I don't care how good it tastes. If it was delicious enough to make you eat yourself alive, it was too good. My uncle was the greatest fry cook who ever lived. Unfortunately, sometimes being the best isn't always a good thing. A full belly. 3 weeks ago, they had only mentioned it. One little attack on an old lady wasn't worth even 10 seconds on the national news. The only reason it even made it was the odd cannibalistic aspect of the attack. It wasn't just one attack though. By the week's end, it was 19. By the next day, it was 34. Each day was like this. The numbers grew exponentially. Then they stopped. No reports on any deaths, only specialists trying to brush away any worries the public had. They used large words and spoke confidently, and most people believed them. The numbers had to have been climbing, but no one seemed to worry. The everyday news, nearly every talk show ended with a few minutes of a PhD talking about this or that. Mass hysteria, they said. Satanic cults, they said. Even I fell into a catatonic trance from the false security. Everything was fine. If it weren't, wouldn't the government be doing something? It wasn't until I saw one at school that I found out how big a problem it had become. Its skin, tinted sickly green, like a seafoam green Crayola marker, was missing chunks or strips. I could see muscle, congealed, almost jelly-like. Blood ran a thick trail down its arm, and the dried variant splattered its tattered shirt. It was out in the yard, moving at a slow, shambling rate. Several of my classmates had recoiled, others making interested comments, and a select handful of brave students even raced to the window. Something primal in the back of my mind clicked on. Maybe it was fear. I couldn't tell you. All I knew was that it said run, and I wasn't about to disagree with it. I was halfway down the main hallway before Mrs. Falloon could even begin to yell at me to come back. She had enough on her plate with the kids, who were now opening the window and calling to the mass of gore and pus. The sun was bright and pleasant when I burst through the door and out into the parking lot. Finally, I was trying to think and realised how stupid I was for doing this. I ran simply because some strange, vague hunch told me. I waited there, panting lightly. I'd catch my breath and head back in. I was in for a detention anyway. Might as well soak up a little sun. That was before a scream rang out, several more following it. I waited, paralysed, for what seemed like an eternity. The fire alarm screeched its warning, and I could hear the dull roar of 474 pairs of feet clamouring to get out, just as they were taught. Before the sea of people flooded the halls, I saw one of my classmates. Bright red splashes covered their clothes. A few more shambled clumsily to join the first. The fear began again, this time renewed, pure and urgent. I bolted. I didn't live too far from the school, but the further I went, the more of those things I found. They were slow, thankfully, and stupid. Avoiding them didn't prove too difficult. The sights they brought, that's another story. Blood everywhere, bits of flesh and clothes, people screaming silently with huge gaping holes in their throats. They look at me with pleading eyes as those things feast on them. Quietly, I whispered a prayer for them. God, help them. I rounded a corner, my feet hitting the sidewalk hard. My legs ached and my lungs held the start of pain. I stopped only a moment, but even that was too short. It had already caught my eye. One of those things. It was a monster, really. Had my mother in its arms. She watched me with wide eyes. They were scared, like a deer's. She tried to cry out to me. I lunged forward and clawed at the thing. I pulled and tore at it like a wild animal. I don't remember when it sunk its teeth into me, but I know it did. The pain was white hot and spread like fire up my arm and through my body. I collapsed. The creature bit me, teeth ripping away at my side, my legs. The fire rippled with each bite. My eyes screwed shut and I was screaming, but I can't remember hearing anything but the blood thumping in my ears. The bites became more infrequent, and the hand with the first bite turned cold and numb. My mother, bloody and crying, dragged herself close to me and touched her hand to my face. I couldn't feel it. The cold had spread. Soft gurgling noises, like listening to a drowning person, faded from my ears. Everything went icy and dark. It's a wonder how much you retain once you become one of those monsters. You wouldn't believe it, and you relive it every second of every day. It's a long, long road from humanity. I should know. My belly's filled with it. Welcome home, my little hellhounds. Tonight we have a compilation of all the best scary stories through December. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video, as this really helps the channel. And don't forget to click that bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload. If you have any scary stories you would like narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/home of scares, and follow me on Twitter at Home of Scares. Now, my little hellhounds, let's get right into it. If the airport wasn't so empty, I wouldn't have paid attention to the wandering girl. I'm 29 and fairly healthy, so flying during the pandemic didn't scare me, and the prices of flights were so cheap that they were hard to pass up. I booked a round-trip flight from JFK to Los Angeles for $200, which was really cheap. I spent a week sightseeing whatever was opened, like hiking up towards the Hollywood sign and just cruising Beverly Hills. Then I headed back to the airport. I have never seen such a large airport almost completely empty. My flight was delayed because the plane hadn't arrived from weather-related issues. I had at least 2 hours to occupy my time at the airport. I decided to get some steps in and walk through the different tunnels. If you have ever been to the Los Angeles airport, then you probably know of the underground hallways that stretch at least 100 yards each that connect tunnels 5, 6 and 7. It is 7 p.m. at night and the tunnels are extremely creepy. There is no one around besides an occasional airline employee. I'm having second thoughts on walking, but I really want to get in my 5 miles today. The hallways are just blank walls with an occasional mural of the Wright brothers or Hollywood ephemera. I have been walking for at least 5 minutes and I haven't seen a single soul. I now know why the airline companies are close to going bankrupt. As I make a turn into one hallway, I see a smaller figure in the distance, which is slowly walking towards me. I start to make out that it is a young girl, no older than 12. She is wearing a long dress and has curly brown hair. She definitely doesn't look like one of the Valley girls or goth girls that I saw around Hollywood. The best way to describe her would be wholesome looking. As she got closer, I can tell she is visibly upset. Being that I'm a 29-year-old guy, I feel reluctant asking her if she's okay. I don't know if she's lost, so I just stop and say, "Hey, are you okay?" She responds, "I'm looking for my mom." I say, "Where did you see her last?" She replied, "I don't know. I was on a plane with her, then I fell asleep." Everything after that feels foggy to me. I then said, "Let's look for security or the police. I'm sure they can help." We walk down the hallway together and I say, "Where did you fly from?" The young girl responds, "I'm from Wisconsin and we flew to California from Milwaukee." I said, "Wow, that's a pretty far trip." She said, "Yeah, we are meeting my dad here who is producing a TV show." I respond, "Wow, that's pretty cool." The young girl seems a little less upset after talking with me. I'm completely amazed walking down these hallways in the second busiest airport in the country and not seeing a single person. We both take the escalator to head towards Terminal 6. As we go up the escalator, I see a policeman. I tell him about the girl missing her mother and he asks me, "What girl are you talking about?" As I turn around, I realize that she just vanished. I scratch my head and wonder if she possibly didn't come up the escalator with me. The policeman is a bit confused and he looks at me as if he was trying to determine if I was crazy or not. He says, "Okay, we'll keep our eyes out for her." Then I decide to get as far away from the policeman as possible from the embarrassment I was feeling. I go back down the escalator and head towards Terminal 7. I walk down the long, empty hallway and I don't see the girl or anyone else. I know I talked with that girl, but I realise If the cops cared that much, they would look at the security cameras that are about every 10 feet. I got to Terminal 7, which looked like it wasn't in service, with all the stores and restaurants being shut down. I head into the bathroom and wash my face off. I get a towel to dry my face, and as I look in the mirror, I see the young girl. My heart skips about 10 beats from being shocked and surprised. I say, "What the hell? Where did you go? This is the men's room." She starts crying, and I say, okay, let's get out of the bathroom. This time I tell her to just sit and wait for an employee to walk by. I stay with her so she doesn't run off again. As we sit and wait, I ask her name, and she tells me Annabelle. I then ask her what show her father was producing, and she said the Pacific Coast Sunset. I respond, I never heard of it. Is it new? The girl responded, yes, it hasn't made it to television yet. As I sit and wait for someone to walk by, I realise that my flight is going to take off in 40 minutes. I explain to the girl that I need to head towards Terminal 5 right now, and she should follow me. We both head back down the long hallway as quickly as possible, and at the end of the hallway I see a man dressed in slacks, a white shirt with a tie, overalls, and he's smoking a cigar. As we get closer, Annabelle runs towards him and says, "Daddy." Then they both hug each other. I quickly say, "Oh great. Bye Annabelle, I have to catch my flight." I make my way into Terminal 5 Gate 52, and the flight attendant gives me an attitude as she was about to shut the door to the jet bridge to get onto the aeroplane. I get on the plane and find my seat. I sit down and try to digest the encounter with Annabelle and her father. I was amazed his smoking didn't set off the fire alarms. I take out my phone as I have a couple of minutes still to use Google as the plane taxis the runway. Out of curiosity, I look up the soon-to-be TV show, The Pacific Coast Sunset, just for the heck of it. After searching for a while, I'm at a loss for words after I click on the Google link, because the show was cancelled after just one pilot episode. Here's the kicker. The pilot episode aired in 1963, and the show was scrapped because the lead producer, Frank Gutling, hung himself after his wife Julia and daughter Annabelle died in a plane wreck. How I saved Newfoundland from a Viking invasion, but nobody believes me. I have one of the easiest jobs in the world. My job is to ensure the gasoline-powered generator keeps the lighthouse visible for boats and ships off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. At one time, working in a lighthouse was much more labour intensive. However, With modern technology, my only job is to ensure the generator for the lighthouse has enough gasoline. I spend most of my days painting. I found the one job that will pay me indirectly for something I love doing. I work on a small island that is only about a mile in diameter. There's no one else on the island besides birds and rodents. The main island of St. John is a 2-mile boat ride where I go once a month to get food and my painting supplies. Today was just another beautiful mid-September day. I was surprised to hear over the CB radio that a storm was heading this way towards Newfoundland. Because I live in the middle of the ocean, storms and strong winds are almost a regular occurrence. But today was a beautiful day. Before going to bed, I made sure the generator had enough fuel. Then I drifted off to sleep. At about 10 p.m, I sleep at the base of the lighthouse on a cozy twin-size bed. At about 2 a.m, I was awakened by the most horrific storm that I have ever experienced since I've taken this job 15 years ago. It was like I was on the inside of a jet engine. I thought for sure the lighthouse was going to topple over. At about 2:15 a.m, the whole top of the lighthouse had flew off. I can hear the violent waves crash within feet of my bed. I feel like I'm on a submarine that has just been torpedoed. I have nowhere to run. The heavy rain, strong winds, and crashing waves are constants. I know within seconds this lighthouse will be toppled and I will drown in the ocean. I throw myself under my bed. The 80 square foot room I'm in is completely dark. I continually yell out, "Please God, no, please no, help, please God." Then, as if someone turned off the switch, the storm went away. At 5:30 a.m, I went outside, the sun starting to come up. The island had been completely destroyed. Whatever vegetation was here is gone now. I look at the lighthouse and I'm amazed I survived, considering how much damage it suffered. From a distance, St. John's was completely dark. I could only imagine how many fatalities there must have been on that island. I attempt to use the CB radio to call for help, but I receive no answer. I figure it will take some time before someone comes to rescue me, so I decide to start to clean up outside. I first check on the generator, which is fine, but the whole top of the lighthouse has been hurled into the ocean. As I start to pick up debris, I see an odd sight in the distance. I squint my eyes to make sure I'm actually seeing what I'm seeing. There are sailing vessels in the water, too many to count, which are no more than 10 miles away. They are sailing in a coordinated fashion, almost like a flock of geese. As the vessels get closer, I literally slap myself in the face to make sure I'm not dreaming. The vessels are wooden and they look like Viking vessels that haven't been used in hundreds of years. The vessels are now within a mile. I think to myself that it's impossible that anything survived that storm, let alone wooden sailing vessels. I run into my room to search my room for binoculars. I run back outside and I say, "Oh my effing God," as I see thousands of men dressed in nothing more than animal furs. All the men on the vessels have the look in their eyes like they are coming to kill everything possible. I start to panic. My whole body starts to shake. I know these vessels are from a different era. I have studied sailboats my whole life. These vessels haven't been made like this in well over 500 years. I don't know if the storm thrusted them out of a time warp or something. The vessels are now within a couple hundred yards. I can see the countless men gripping their axes and swords. I have to do something. The island is too small for me to hide. I get a quick thought that pops into my head. What if I get the portable generator and plug in my circular saw and my battery operated radio? I'll quickly gather those things and run to the beach. I'll blast the radio and demonstrate the use of the circular saw. Hopefully these marauders will realise that I'm the only person on this island, and hopefully they'll be mesmerised by my unworldly gadgets. About 10 of the vessels hit the sand, and I see about 40 of the men exit each vessel and start to come towards me. As I hold the circular saw with both my hands, all I can hear is the heavy beating of my heart. I completely tune out the radio and the circular saw. I'm about 5'8" and 150 pounds, with all of my clothes on. As the men approach me, I can see their leader make his way towards the front of the other men. He has to be close to 6 feet tall and 6 inches in height. He has a weathered, beaten face and is nothing more than muscles. His long, dirty, blonde hair goes midway down his back, and he is even wearing elk or reindeer fur. He is the closest thing to the real-life He-Man that I have ever seen. There must be close to 400 men behind him who are shorter than the leader, but they all have the same rugged demeanour. At this point, I wish I could just die. Nothing in life has prepared me for this moment. The leader looks at my circular saw and stares at it. He tilts his head from side to side as he tries to make sense of it. I don't know if he can distinguish the sound from the generator, from the sounds of the radio, from the sounds from the circular saw. In an effort to not lose his unwielding attention, I slowly lower the saw towards the ground where a log lays from the storm. I cut the log and I hear gasps from the crowds of men. The leader is overwhelmingly impressed by my gadgets. He even plays with the dials on my radio, where he hears mostly static and an occasional broadcast from St. John's. He turns around and tells his men something, and then the men disperse as they search the rest of the island. All of the men try to get a closer look at my gadgets as they pass by, and the leader barks something at them, which I assume means go away or mind your own business. I hand the circular saw over to the leader and I demonstrate to him to hold the button down to get the saw to work. He takes the saw and he seems completely enchanted, like a kid using a remote control car for the first time. He then cautiously starts to cut branches of wood to the point where he just doesn't want to stop. Minutes go by and I show him how to refuel the generator. I can tell that he has never seen anything mechanically or gas powered before. He puts both of his hands on the generator as it vibrates. I demonstrate that the saw has to be plugged into the generator in order for it to work. I think I found the one thing that can tame these savages. The leader looks much more interested in using than on killing me. To the leader, he says something to them in a harsh language that I can't pinpoint its origins. 4 of the men pick up the gadgets that I demonstrated for them and they load them onto the leader's sailing vessel. The leader looks at me and drops his battle axe on the ground, as I assume is a gift for me. Then all the men get in their sailing vessels and head out into the Atlantic away from Newfoundland. I stand on the beach completely overwhelmed. Every ounce of emotion has left my body as I try to make sense of what just happened. I never believed in UFOs or even God, but now I'm second guessing everything. The next day, Mr. Braddock, the superintendent of all the lighthouses on the eastern shores of Canada, comes to inspect the damage to the island. He sees the damage to the lighthouse and knows that it will take weeks for it to become functional again. He is the first person I have seen or talked to regarding the Viking invasion of the island. He listens in complete disbelief as I tell him about the sailing vessels and the men on board. He thinks I have a concussion from the storm. Then I show him the battle axe and he is completely enthralled by the old world craftsmanship. He thinks it was stolen from a museum. Mr. Braddock tries to get me to leave the island and get medical attention, but I insist that I'm fine and I remain on the island. I have made several paintings from what I observed, and I know I'll never receive credit for saving Newfoundland from a Viking invasion. No cars come in or out of the Oak Mountain housing development. I live in a Philadelphia suburban area that is made up of mostly newer housing developments. The area was mostly made up of farmland until the early 1980s, when a countless amount of new housing developments sprung up. In the early 2000s, I was newly married and still living in the city, watching the news and seeing more and more crime in the area where I lived. Motivated by my wife Gina and I flee to the suburbs. We were both young, in our early 20s, so our budget of what we could afford was limited. We were going to have kids someday, so we wanted a kid-friendly area with a good school district. We found our house in Bucks County, located adjacent to the housing development. We figured that we had the advantages of having a housing development that contained 200 plus homes located less than a quarter of a mile from us, without having all the restrictions related to living in the housing development, like having a strict homeowners association. The development is called Oak Mountain and is made up of non-brick composite siding row homes. There are no security gates to get into the development, and it has two entrances, where one is close to the small town of Fog Creek on one side and to a public trail on the other side. We had our daughter Grace a couple years later after moving into our new home. We could see one of the access roads to the housing development from our house, where the public trail runs through our backyard. One of the things that Gina and I were discussing is how we never see a car entering or leaving the development. Gina and I had decided to walk through the development on one spring afternoon, which was about 2 years since we have moved to our new house. We pushed Grace up the hill in the stroller. We were astonished by just how many houses there were and how we never heard a peep coming from the people living in Oak Mountain. The development went around in a circle and the houses had a late 1970s look to them. Though there seemed to be over 200 houses packed into the development, not one of them were for sale. When we were looking for a house in this area, which was odd, as Gina and I continued to walk, everything seemed orderly and precise. There was no trash on the ground. The grass was nicely cut. The houses were well maintained, and it had a nice pool and playground area. But on the flip side, there were no kids playing in the pool or in the playground. As we continued to walk the circle, we would see an occasional person outside of their respective homes. We got the look from people that we were unfamiliar to them, but they still waved to us. We finished the circle and went back home. Gina said to me, "Wasn't it odd that we didn't see one kid?" I responded, "Yeah, but we will go again next Sunday and I'm sure there will be kids out playing. Maybe they were involved in some type of sporting activities or something." Then Gina said, "Don't you think that's unlikely, considering that we haven't seen a car enter or exit the development?" I responded, "Yes, considering that it seemed like each house had a car and the nearest supermarket isn't just a block away." Gina said, "Yeah, that's a little odd. The next Sunday came around, and we decided to take the same walk through the development. As we walked, everything seemed like it was the previous week. It was almost like everything was exactly the same people in the same locations, the same cars were parked in the same spots, and still there were no kids out playing. When we got back home, Gina said, "I feel like we just went through a movie set where all the actors performed their precise roles as they did last week, like the movie with Jim Carrey, where I can't think of its name at this moment." I responded, "Yeah, but the people in Oak Mountain didn't come across as friendly like they did in that movie. Yeah, they waved at us, but I definitely got the vibe like they knew we didn't belong there." Gina responded, "Yeah, I felt the same way. You know what's odd? Growing up in Philadelphia, I didn't know the people 7 houses down from me or what they looked like, so why would we stand out, considering the amount of houses located in the development?" I said, "Yeah, I agree. It was almost like we were being watched." Gina replied, "Yes, that's the exact vibe I got, that the people who were outside were intentionally placed to have constant eyesight on us." I responded, "Yeah, that's odd. We both got the same vibe." Another thing I noticed from the people we saw was they looked kind of homely. There was no level of sophistication to them or something. It's like when we watch the TV show The Duggars, where everybody seems just a little bit off, whether it's their hairstyles or the clothes they were wearing. Gina responds, "Yes, I agree with everything you're saying, but still the oddest thing is that there wasn't one kid out playing. We should go back next week." I responded, "Yes, eventually we'll have to see a kid. We know it's not a retirement community based on their property tax codes." I couldn't sleep this Wednesday night because of the thoughts I was having about the Oak Mountain housing development. We thought it would be a nice place for Grace to meet kids to play with, and we still haven't seen one kid yet. As I laid down in bed, I heard a truck slow down in front of our house. I got out of bed and noticed it was turning into the housing development. The truck was about the size of a large U-Haul truck. I thought to myself, this is the first vehicle that I have ever observed going into the development, and it's 2 a.m. in the morning. The following Sunday came around, and Gina and I decided to take the same walking route through the development. We saw the same lady watering her plants outside her house. Gina nudged me and said, "I'm going to talk to this lady." I said, "Okay." I got a weird vibe when Gina said that, almost like we were on the set of a live TV show and we were about to interrupt a scene. Gina said to the woman, "Hello, what a beautiful day." The woman responded, "Yes, lovely, isn't it?" I picked up a hint of a Pennsylvanian Dutch accent when she said that. Then Gina said, "This is my husband Ted and my daughter Grace." The woman seemed like she was starting to get uncomfortable. I noticed her start to look around, almost like she didn't want to be caught saying the wrong thing to us. Gina reached into the stroller and picked Grace up. Toddlers are good icebreakers, and I knew that was Gina's mindset. The woman got real uncomfortable when Grace was taken out of the stroller and held by Gina. It was like watching someone who was deathly afraid of dogs. I didn't know if it was because of Grace or the fact that we weren't supposed to be engaging with this woman. The woman awkwardly responded, "Oh yes, she's pretty. Please excuse me." Then she rushed into her house. I have never encountered anything like that in my life. It was like we were Nazis marching through her town, where she didn't want to say the wrong thing. But I think it wasn't us that she was concerned with, but rather it was her fellow neighbours. Gina did the same thing to 2 other people who were in front of their houses. We pretty much got the same response with each person we encountered. Also, this time I noticed we were being watched by people inside their homes. I could see them peeking through their blinds. Gina and I both got home and Gina said, "Oh my god, what kind of messed up crap was that?" I responded, "I really don't have an explanation for what we encountered." For some odd reason, none of the people wanted to interact with us in any way. It was like we were taking them out of their comfort zone or something. Gina said, "What do we do?" I said, "I really have no idea. We never thought of a scenario like this when we moved into this house. I get that not everyone is going to like us, but there is a whole community up there that is living in their own world. I saw a truck pull into their development last Wednesday." Gina said, "You did? Why didn't you say anything?" I responded, "Don't you think it's extremely odd that a truck pulling into a housing development is breaking news to us?" Gina said, "Yes, but we haven't seen anyone pull in or out since we moved here." Gina said, "Yeah, I agree." I responded, "I'll set my alarm for this coming Wednesday to see if the truck comes through again." Wednesday came and I didn't need the alarm because I was already up. I heard the same truck come by a little after 2 a.m. I decided to rush out the door to see why it had pulled into the development. I grabbed a pair of binoculars because I knew I was going to be noticed if I got too close. As I walked up into the development, I dropped to one knee when I saw the truck stopped in the middle of the development. With my binoculars, I could see countless people lined up behind the truck. Each person was handed a box that I assumed had food in it. I figured that I had seen enough, but I really wanted to see where the truck came from. So I hurried home and I got into my car with the intent to follow the truck. Fortunately, the truck exited the same way it entered, through the development, which was close to my house. I followed the truck to its warehouse in Reading, Pennsylvania, called Budget Beef. I have never heard of this company before, so I researched it online when I got home. From the research, I discovered that it's a meat distribution center with its main operation in Mexico. Other than providing low-cost meat, I couldn't find much more about the company. When Gina woke up, I filled her in about the truck I followed and the people waking up early in the morning to get their meat rations. We felt it was best to go back through the development again on Sunday. Hopefully this time the people would feel more comfortable towards us and be more inviting. As we entered the development this time, every house was watching us, and they weren't hiding behind their blinds. The word must have gotten out that we were coming through. Now, every Sunday, I started to sweat in fear. I really didn't know if we were going to be bum rushed, where everyone would run out of their house at once towards us. I felt like we were inmates being sized up the first day walking into prison. Gina started to cry. I think she was just overwhelmed with fear and rejection. The people we had seen the previous week looked at us angrily. Then they quickly walked inside their house. Gina said, "What did we do? Why is everyone watching us? Why did that woman look at us like we murdered her kid?" I said, "I really have no clue. No one knows us here, so I don't know why they're responding to us this way." I got caught up in the moment, seeing Gina upset, and I made the bold decision to go knock on somebody's door. It wasn't a hard decision to pick a house, because every single one of them were watching us. The closest house we were by, I saw a man in his 40s watching us through his window, so I decided to knock on his door. As I knocked on his door, the man didn't come to open the door. I said, "I know you're in there. I saw you watching us." The man yelled out, "Get the fuck out of here now." I said, "Sir, it's just me, my wife and my daughter." Gina heard the exchange and started to cry. I didn't blame her. I walked as intimidating as possible, almost like I was trying